there's a cancer of complacency in the community that we don't realize that a worldwide pogrom is taking place. And we have leaders who are far more interested in maintaining their positions in a political sense than solving a problem.
Welcome to another edition of the Mael Time podcast. I'm joined today by AJ Edelman, Israeli Olympic athlete and social media influencer. I guess you can call it that word. I think you'd probably
Please,
stay away from that word.
I hate that term.
You hate that term. Okay. We'll get into why you hate that
term. It's associated with grifting and just awfulness.
I don't disagree with you. But you have influence on social media and that people see what you write. So you are an individual that people listen to on social media channels. Whether that's an influencer or not, we can discuss that. But for those in the audience that are unaware of your backstory, how did you become an Olympic athlete?
Here, I can hear you.
So for those who don't know, how did you become an Olympic athlete?
How did I become an Olympic athlete? My journey, I think every single Olympian has their own very individualized, very personal journey. And I'm kind of, I mean, it's a deep question. How does one become an Olympic athlete? Because the motivations are very varied. My motivations when I started 12 years ago in competing for Israel were vastly different than they are now. There's a combination when it comes to the Olympics of something that you want to accomplish personally, and I'd say extraneously as well. My journey at the outset was incredibly externally motivated. I wanted to change how Jews viewed their place in sport, and how when it came to sport, the viewpoint has generally been, I think, I always tell people, if your child came to you and asked, would you, if a child came to their parent and said, I want to play the piano, can we go get some piano lessons? Or I want to be a pianist, really, even as a proxy. A Jewish parent will generally stop at nothing to help them accomplish that dream. They'll put immense resources behind it, time. They'll take them to piano lessons. There's a lot that would go into that journey. But if a kid came to their parent and said, hey, I want to be a professional archer, or I want to make the Olympics in curling, let's say, or any number of sports, I think a very Jewish parent response would be, what do you think, there's a future in that? You think you're going to make money from that? Is there, but you'd have never told your kid when they asked about the piano, what do you think, going to be Mozart? And I think that's, I think sport had always struck me as not only a pathway for development, because it really helped my life chart a course that was appropriate and good, but it touches so many people when you compete around you. And having grown up in a system, when I grew up in Boston in the 90s was a very different place for Jewish people in Boston than it is today. Especially, and I'd say most especially for people who were openly Jewish, who identified first and foremost as Jewish, people who wore a kippah, religious Jews. People just not interacted or met Jews in many capacities. And so when I was interacting on sports teams with kids, I was the first and only point of contact that they would have with a Jew who was not just a completely unaffiliated kid that they had seen in their public school, who would really just had a Jewish last name but didn't know anything about Jews. I thought sport is so powerful. It's such a value add for the community. Why don't we invest in sport? And I realized that when it came to this problem, it was a self-fulfilling negative process of looking at Jews in sport and saying, well, we don't do that. And people say we don't do that because we don't have role models in the sport. The role models are like 100 years from 100, like Hank Greenberg. When we talk about baseball player, Hank Greenberg, right? There's a few, but yeah, but there, I mean, even it's such a lack of depth that when it comes to, like, Amari Stoudemire was not Jewish when he played basketball, but we don't have any Jewish basketball stars to grab onto. So, so the lack of investment creates a lack of athletes who create a further lack of investment. And someone had to break that chain. And through a pure naivete, I thought I could break the chain. I really thought that I could go out into the world as a sort of ambassador for Jewish sport, accomplish something in Jewish sport, and then talk to people about how much value I had seen that adding to the community and to those who I interacted with, and see if I could change something. But it that was the motivation almost exclusively for the first 4 years of the journey until I made the Olympics. I was told in 2014 at a scouting report, at a combine, essentially in Lake Placid, New York, that I would never make the Olympics in sliding sport, any of the sliding sports. It was not what I was going to do. I couldn't run. I had scoliosis in my spine. Like I couldn't balance on the skeleton sled, and I took that scouting report as a real motivation to say, like, if I can overcome that scouting report, and I don't have any funds behind me, I don't have any help from the country behind me, like, I just go out and I doggedly pursue it, and I do everything I can to become a success that I want to become. That's a really good story to tell people. And so that was
How did you come to bobsled? Even growing up in Massachusetts, as we both did, I don't know that I had met anyone who had ever seen a bobsled in person.
Yeah, I actually didn't really ever see a bobsled either until October of 2013. So we had a former member of the MIT hockey team was affiliated with the Israeli hockey team. And so the Israeli hockey team came knocking at the door, and they said, "Would you consider playing for us? Would you move to Israel, and would you play for the national team?" And at the time, I asked a man who you know, the late great Mike Rosenberg, from Maimonides School. He was the alumni director of Maimonides School. And I said, Mike, I'm considering, like, what to do after university. I'm kind of stuck at a crossroads. I had always imagined going into tech, building up a small war chest, buying some real estate, doing the Jewish thing, right? Building up and building a legacy for my future family. And I had a whole sorts of aspirations on building a legacy of generational wealth for my future children and my grandchildren. Just, I wanted to be the best, right, at just building. And so for that to be derailed for a certain period of time, there was a lot of thought that had to be put into that. And one of the people I spoke to was Mike. And Mike said, AJ, there hasn't been a single person from Maimonides that's gone on to play at the level that you're playing. In any sport, that didn't go to Yeshiva University of Brandeis, essentially. And I thought that was nuts. Like, it really hit me when he said that, because we have hundreds, thousands of alumni, and statistically, it just made no sense. There were far better athletes than myself that have gone through Maimonides School. I'm not a stellar physical specimen. I used to be incredibly overweight, bordering on obese. I really turned my life around at 18, 19 when I set a goal of being a better version of myself. And so it really struck me. It was like, how did I become that? Like, how did that just fall onto me? And I thought it was a societal problem. So in October of 2013, I was sitting down wondering what to do. And so I saw in the news that the U.S. bobsled team had been selected, the national team had been selected for the upcoming Sochi Olympics. And I saw it, and it kind of captivated me. And I was like, you know what? This is like God telling me, do this. And so I went out that night. I have massive ADD, and people with ADD know this problem well. Like, you get hooked on something, like, it's like a dog chasing its tail. It will never stop until you get the tail. So I spent multiple nights just up all night trying to email people, message people, like, does Israel have a bobsled team? What's this all about? How do I get into the sport? I don't know anything about the Olympics. And I settled. I finally made contact with David Greaves, who's up in Winnipeg, who was an original member of the founding team in 2002. And he was like, dude, No one does this for Israel anymore because it costs an arm and a leg, and you're not going to be funded. And the Israelis don't even want you because they think that you're just an American carpetbagger coming over to take advantage of the country. So, if you want to go try something, go try skeleton because that's a single person sport, and at least there you could do it on your own. So that's how I got into skeleton.
Okay, and what had been the results for this Israeli bobsled team before? You said it was founded in 2002. Had they had any success?
Um, I can't find the results online ever because the results of the sport online go back to like 2006, and they disbanded in 2006. So I don't know the pure results of the team. They didn't get to the games primarily because they didn't even pursue the final Olympic season. The Israeli Olympic Committee looked so poorly on this endeavor that they told them even
Why?
if they qualified. Um, the Israeli Olympic Committee is of the view generally that if you're not a medal contender, you're not worth touching. And in a racing sport, like bobsled's Formula One on ice, essentially, it requires immense resources. And so to become a medal contender, you need millions of dollars. And the Israeli Olympic Committee was like, we don't even want to touch this, right? Not worth our time. So they told them that if you made the Olympics, wouldn't even send you. We won't accept the invitation because the country has to accept the invitation. It's not an individualized invitation; it's an invitation to the country. And so the team disbanded. They were like, "Why are we going to spend hundreds of thousands of dollars if we can't even go to the Olympics?" So it
And
was
for those
actually
of
the
us who
original.
are
Yep.
for those of us who are really unfamiliar with the ins and outs of bobsled, you said it's like Formula One on ice. Can you expand on that just briefly? What what are the differences in terms of sleds and equipment?
Good question. So to give you a sense, a lot of countries have proprietary built sleds. The Germans' national engineering firm FES builds the German sleds. Ferrari builds the Italian sleds.
That
BMW
has to
built
be
the
a
American sled.
super sick sled.
It's a good sled. The Americans just dumped like $8-9 million into their sled program and now have the best sleds in the entire world. They're proprietary. It was made by a race car designer. Can't remember his name,
Have you gone down on any
but
of these sleds?
you can't. They're so guarded, man. Like I couldn't put a finger on the American sled. Very closely guarded technology.
What about the
Because
Italian?
they're
How do you know that it's all fair?
it's usually not. There's usually a lot of games that are played to skirt the rules. Like a lot of people view cheating as the exception in when it comes to Olympic sport and stuff like that. Cheating's the rule. If you the playing field starts incredibly tilted, you would only be able to bring it back into line if you yourself sort of cheated. Um, we we don't cheat. We don't have the technology nor the money to cheat. They're always fighting an uphill battle. But for most of the rules in the rule book are there because of cheating that takes place, and they finally find out how the cheating took place, and then they insert rules to make it harder to do that same thing.
So in
So
Formula One, you have tests before you go into the
yeah,
grid, and then after. Do
they
those exist
they
for bobsled?
they have what's called sled check. They kind of like put a flashlight in, check some measurements and stuff like that. Um, it it's all bull for the most part. I mean, the countries that really had dominated in skeleton, for example, in my sport in the first 4 years, Latvia was dominant. A dude named Martins Dukers and his brother Tomas, and there's all sorts of cheating that goes on with runners, like the blades that go into the bottom of the sled. Like they're our tires, right? So those are the contact point with the ice. If you manipulate the runner materials or put a coating on that runner, it makes every sort of difference. And in 2018, I was pretty sure that there was only about probably 4 or 5 of the 30 maybe that hadn't screwed with the runners. There was a lot of dirty stuff that was going on. And Tomas and Martins, who dominated the sport, were caught 3 times in 4 years doing crazy illegal stuff with their runners.
And what was the
Worse
penalty?
than the worst penalty they ever got was being disqualified retroactively from one race. Like the sport is very tilted. Olympics are very tilted when it comes to the imposement of penalties for rule breaking. So, for example, the Jamaican bobsled team was caught doping before the 2018 Olympics, before the Olympics, and were allowed to still compete at the Olympic Games and then handed a suspension for the next short period of time after the Games. The results at the Games stood. They were allowed to compete at the Games, but if that was Russia, they'd have been, So
wait a sec. So you had known cheaters that competed after they were caught cheating in the Olympics?
They didn't disclose to the rest of everyone that they had been caught cheating, but if you Google Jamaican bobsled team doping, you'll find that in 2018, the pilot for Team Jamaica was caught doping.
And I'm imagining that you had no idea about this cheating and everything going on before you decided to devote your life to this sport.
Correct. You kind of get really hit hard by in a racing sport, it becomes apparent when the physics don't start adding up. So in a racing sport, the physics at play are friction, and when you hit walls, the momentum should be slowed down because there's friction involved in hitting a wall, and the energy starts to dissipate. When people hit walls or go sideways, which is skidding, it's kind of like turning your knife to the side, like it cuts more ice, but they're still keeping speed or gaining speed. You start to know intuitively there's some screwery at play, to put it nicely. It became very clear and easy to see starting, you just start to identify where, as you gain more experience, what the smell test, what the sniff test is. And so there's still a lot. I believe
it's kind of like
that
Tucker Carlson all of a sudden start
yeah.
bashing Douglas Murray and saying that he's not an expert on anything. Very oddly, after Tucker Carlson network launches and you're not really sure where the money's coming from and what's going on, it seems a little weird.
I actually would venture to say that bobsled and skeleton are probably one of the most dirtiest sports in Olympic sports.
This is fascinating. This is a Pandora's box that I had no idea about. So
it's incredibly hard to overcome that.
So when you qualified for the Olympics, what was the reaction from the Israeli Olympic Committee?
Oh, they were so shocked that they had taken all of the Olympic team photos and handed out all of the Olympic team gear already in the prior months to the team that they thought was going to the games. So if you ever look for a 2018 official Olympic team photo, I'm not there because bobsled and skeleton are the last sports to know if you qualified. It's not on a rolling basis. You don't qualify at a certain competition like most sports. There's a cutoff date, and on that date, the results are in a table, and then your qualification is announced. So I held the place on the last day through double medaling. It's called, like, I medaled in the two races going into that final qualification day. It's kind of the same as in 22. We lost our spot on the final day because 5 or 6 teams had been knocked out by COVID, allowing a team 7 spots behind to just really jump. But in 2018, they were so.
I want to get to that in a second, actually, about how that affected you, because I'm curious about that mechanism. So basically, you're not even in the official team photo. It's as if you never existed.
Almost. But yeah, even when I got to Israel, I was like, where's my kit, right? You have to wear only basically approved clothing in the Olympic Village. You have to dress like all the other Israelis. I was like, where's my stuff? And they're like, we only have XXLs left because we didn't know you were coming. Like we didn't think to even buy. They basically shopped on Alibaba they didn't put any money into this kit. So they shopped on like Alibaba. They found a place in China that would basically just put the logos on this highly flammable, terrible material, incredibly uncomfortable clothes, and that's it was so Israeli. It was so Israeli.
This sounds like a pretty standard Israeli experience. Okay, so
pretty much
22, you lose your spot on the last possible day. Have you
22
gone
was
over that?
insane. 22 is insane. Um, there's a certain maturity that comes with aging. I think it's funny. I think if I hadn't made the Olympics prior, um, it would still be something that haunted me to this day. Because in December, so the cutoff was January 16th. December 14th, 15th, we finish up our races in North America, and we're so far in the lead. We're so far in the spot that I called the head of my federation. I'm like, David, we're going. Like, there's no way they jump. They finish on average 24th, like the Netherlands team, they had to jump us in the quota ranking. They had to gain enough points over the last few races. And in order to do that, they would have had to have finished on average like 19th when they were finishing on average 24th. And I was like, there's just no way they do that. Like, that's not how bobsled works. They don't have that skill to do that. Their races were all in Europe. Something very unfortunate happened around mid-December to early January of 2022, which was a strain of COVID called Omicron. The Omicron strain of COVID was extremely virulent, and it swept through the sport. Everyone's in a locker room, swept through the sport, and at the time, the rules were if one of the people on your team tested positive, the whole team is knocked out. And so over the final 2 weeks of qualification, 2 or 3 weeks, 2 or 3 different bobsled pilots from other countries tore their hamstrings, so they couldn't push the sled. And then like 3 or 4 teams got COVID, allowing this team to finish like 19th, 19th, 20th, 19th, etc. Ultimately, they jumped us on the final evening by 1 spot because of that.
Soul crushing.
It was, at the time, it was horrific. At the time, it was like I'm a pessimist at heart when it comes to the markets, and I'm a pessimist at heart when it comes to my own accomplishments. I think that's what motivates a lot of athletes to move forward, is the feeling that things are going to go wrong if you don't actively work hard to make them good. Watching every week as this was unfolding and seeing, all right, this person tore their hamstring, this person, whatever was going on. It's kind of like watching your home burn down in real time, I would imagine, but not being able to do anything about it. Right? Our races were finished. We weren't entering these European races. We had no control over it. But just seeing every week, these people were knocked out. These people tested positive. These people, it was actually quite crushing. But it took a bit of time in the year after. A lot of people ask why I got the tattoo on the arm. And the tattoo on the arm, even though I'm a religious Jew, is I have 2 tattoos on my body. The first was I was in a pretty dire spot before 22, before the season started, where a coach of ours was supposed to be a coach, but didn't tell us that he had used the position that we had hired him for to leverage a better position for another country. And he didn't tell us. We found out by accident. So all of a sudden one day I was on the roof of my building in New York, or my brother's apartment in New York, and I found out by mistake that our coach was not our coach. And there were about 7 or 8 Israelis about to come over who had never seen ice before, and I was supposed to, put this whole team together, and we had no coach. And I at the time, was also in a pretty emotionally abusive / manipulative relationship. So all these things were kind of converging on that moment. And so I got a tattoo on my ankle to remind me. I was like, you've done this before, go do it again. Like, don't cry, don't complain. Like, life is unfair, and that's just how stuff goes, right? Like, the worst thing you can do is just get beaten by this. Like, you've done this before and no one thought you could before. Now you're going to do it again. So I got the tattoo on the ankle. That was from a place of despair, almost, and desperation. And I hated the fact that pushed me to cross a line in my Judaism that before I'd held pretty sacred. Like, don't get tattoos.
What are you doing?
But it was the wrong decision. It was the wrong decision. But I've suffered from major depressive disorder since I was a child, drug resistant. So I just have to live with it. There's no medicine that makes it better. I just have to deal with it. And the way I deal with it is just moving forward, right? Just dealing with life's problems. But at the time, I kind of succumbed to it and I got the tattoo. I was pretty pissed off that I had done that, and every single time I looked at it, it was on the ankle because I was like, if women see it in the future, they're not going to date me. So I put it on the ankle. Um, but after the games, it took a good deal of time to soul search and to figure out how to triangulate from what had just transpired. Ultimately, the differential was zero point 0.1 seconds. And that zero point 0.1 seconds would have also been overcome with a new sled. We were driving a 15-year-old sled. The new sleds cost like 120,000 euros. The aftermarket sleds that we can kind of obtain. And I was driving a 15-year-old sled for 20 grand that I had purchased. All of the Jewish philanthropists had said no. Not a single sports team owner had said yes to helping push the team across the finish line. And a new sled would have made a half-second difference. And so, to me, it was very crushing in multiple ways. Not just that.
How many meetings did you have?
Not just hundreds, tons of meetings.
Hundreds of Jewish philanthropists and
hundreds of conversations
every single time.
Hundreds of conversations. I remember calling up a sports team owner, and the wife picked up, and she was like, "You don't even sound Israeli." And I was like, "But I'm Israeli Olympian, right? Like I'm just trying to get this thing across the finish line." And she laughed. She laughed. She was like, "Yeah, good luck with that," and hung up the phone. So I think originally in fundraising, I'm sure you know as much as I do because you do a lot of fundraising. Originally, it's personal because your personal mission is being spat on by so many people, right? And it's not just a no when it comes to raising for this sort of cause. It's a no with a lot of laughing, right? Like that sounds crazy and that sounds nuts.
If you, again, in my personal capacity, fundraising and engaging in these endeavors, for me, I can understand someone at first when we're talking about equipment for Israeli soldiers. I can understand someone looking at the situation and saying, well, the IDF spokesperson said something else. B, that's kind of embarrassing. You have this country that is supposed to be very secure and technologically advanced, and they're missing basic equipment. That doesn't make sense. C, what the heck do you know? You're living in America. And again, you can overcome those objections because the facts are the facts and you can explain that. But when it comes to representing Israel on the world stage and being able to promote Israeli Olympic accomplishment and achievement and diversity, not every single person on this Israeli bobsled team is a white Ashkenazi Jew. What kind of objections are you receiving?
Yeah, actually, in 22, the majority of the team was Druze. Fascinatingly enough, so it would have been a Druze Jewish bobsled team.
That's like exactly what all of the center left, and even some center right philanthropists are looking for: the diversity of Israel, looking away from the white Sabra colonizer look. What is the actual objection they're offering you? Are they offering you feedback as to why they're saying no, or it's just saying bobsled is stupid, we have no interest?
Generally, the response would be sport is not in our giving profile, they call it. So it's just not an area of interest. They don't see it as an important problem to solve. I got a little more in-depth understanding of it from someone who deals with philanthropy a lot, who had mentioned it's not something you could put your name on. It's very difficult to attach a name to that, and a lot of giving, especially in amounts that are over, let's say $200, $300, involve putting your name on something, right? And there's not a lot back that you get from this team. There's an if component there, right? An Israeli bobsled team making the Olympics, like who would have even thought? And so it's kind of it's just not a priority.
When you have spots on your sled, if someone was insisting on their name being on the sled, couldn't it be the Joe and Jane Doe sled?
In philanthropy, you have like 3 seconds to get someone's attention. That's that. it takes rounds of discussion or just a longer discussion to say, hey, the sled is essentially a big billboard. I think Tablet was amazing during the World Championships this year that Tablet put their name on our sled. They're our first ever sled name sponsor. In 11 years, I've never had a sled name sponsor, like someone who actually took up a decent portion of the sled, and they, to their immense credit, the first ones that ever did. But it took us finishing third place during the war last year, like third place on the North American circuit, being a real powerhouse in the sport to accomplish that. I just think that the Jewish philanthropy space, when we talk about priorities and giving, the Jewish philanthropy space is far more interested in external giving than internal giving. Right? The vast majority of people who are in a position to give, who we have approached, have names on buildings for like universities, right? They give to people who wouldn't give a hoot if 10-7 had gone 2 to 3x bigger, right? Like Columbia, and it's kind of a shame, right? Because it's not indicative about just our team. But I really don't understand why hundreds of millions of dollars are going to Columbia in the first place when kids can't afford tuition to go to Jewish day school. I just don't get that.
You're offering a withering indictment of Jewish philanthropy. And the other thing is, philanthropy at its core is not really supposed to be about the giver. Obviously, you have interests that pique their interest, and it's their money. So let's get that on the table, right? And they can choose to do whatever they want. They could light it on fire if they wanted to. But the core of tzedakah and the core of what giving is supposed to be about at its finest is looking for those who need assistance. And obviously, Israeli bobsled is not trying to feed poor families, right? That's
no,
not
it's niche.
That's not the pitch. But you can also have philanthropy that promotes accomplishments for the state of Israel.
Yeah, so the bobsled team stands as an example and a stepping stone in a far larger goal, right? The bobsled team is the keystone or the foundational project of a larger foundation that we've started to just increase Jewish representation in sport. It stands as an example of what can be accomplished when there's almost no investment and hard work. Kal v'chomer, all the more so when there is investment. And so we take a portion of every donation that the team ever gets and put it towards grants that other athletes come to us and ask for help. Right? We've given out 5 or 6 different grants to athletes, a rock climber, soccer player, like people who just can't afford their training. That's what the team that's why the team exists. And so in talking to people, it's not about sending the bobsled team to the Olympics. It's about inspiring a future generation to pursue sport and to reinvigorate Jewish giving in the sports area, because sport is a pathway of development for Jewish children in a way that chess or playing a musical instrument is an avenue for development, learning right from wrong and goal setting, but also outreach so that other people actually have a point of contact of someone who's Jewish. A lot of people, it happens every day in my life. I'm very, very machmir. I'm very insistent on wearing Jewish Israeli gear at all times so that people, if I interact with them positively, they know that it was a Jew, right? Like they just have a positive impression on that. The team is a walking ambassadorship of that, and that's how it's always supposed to be with all Israeli athletes, without Jews even, is you're an ambassador of yourself, your people, and your country. That's the motto of the team. That's me, la mi l'Aretzi, for myself, for my people, and for my country. But it is a withering indictment on Jewish giving, because as we've seen, especially since October 7th, or the flaws since October 7th and how it's been exposed when it comes to campus anti-Semitism. The Jewish giving space is incredibly externally focused. And there's a reason for that. In that philanthropy at its core comes down to speaking to an issue that you care about. But also, there is always, not always, there are some people who are just amazingly selfless givers. But in many times, there is a component of something that gets back, right? Influence or access, or just generally being able to to talk about a project that you're a part of that other people also feel that they're a part of. And so putting your name on Columbia's athletic stadium is, I, I mean, personally, as a kid, I just would never, right? Like, Columbia hates Jews.
It'd be kind of
Objectively,
embarrassing at this point, right?
Columbia hates Jews. But if you read the letter, and, the Crafts family has done immense good, just immense good for the Jewish people and for the state of Israel. They fund immense projects for Jews. But in the letter that I read when they pulled the millions in funding that they give to Columbia, they noted that they were pulling it until things change. Things are never going to change. It's a systemically anti-Semitic institution. Why would you ever give another drop of money to Columbia? Right? Fund a Jewish educational institute with that money. Right? But it's a trend. In Jewish giving, it's a trend. It's extremely externally focused. I think the Dave Portnoy situation was extremely indicative of that. Right? Someone puts out a sign saying "F the Jews." You don't need to rehabilitate him. You don't need to educate him. It's not a teachable moment for him. He's lost. Right? Like, the world is not a better place by bringing him moderately back over to your side. The guy's a virulent anti-Semite. I mean, it's crazy.
Right. I think obviously El Prez has his way, and we're both Bostonians, so we are familiar with him. And I'll say this: imagine if he just went on Instagram Live with his tefillin on and said that I'm proud to be a Jewish person, and these are core values of Judaism. It would be unbelievable. And instead, we sit there and they're preparing to spend, $50,000 or whatever it might be to go with a film crew, and I'm guessing, and multiple people, presumably flying first class to Poland, to Auschwitz, to take a tour. It's crazy, especially when you have Israeli causes, Jewish causes that are in need and don't have the proper funding. I don't know why we would spend 1 cent on someone like that.
If there's a soldier who doesn't have a proper helmet on his head in Gaza, I agree with you. I don't understand why a single cent is spent on an anti-Semite named Mo to send him over to Poland. But it's part of the Jewish psyche to fix other people's problems before we fix our own problems. It just is. It's part of the Tikkun Olam virus, I call it. Like, Tikkun Olam has words after it that say B'malchut Shaddai, right? Fix the world within the kingdom of God, right? The kingdom of God there means your community, right? You have to fix your own community. If your house is broken,
it starts with yourself and then your family.
Exactly.
It's not just going out there and it's like whack-a-mole. And the other thing, which gets people very uncomfortable, but when I was at Brandeis, I graduated in 2015, but I was very much involved in fighting the campus anti-Semites. People that were in charge of formulating strategy and policy then, certain activist groups that raise millions, tens of millions of dollars on an annual basis, they were working on this problem back then. They'd been working on it for a decade then, so now it's been 2 decades. And it's fair to say that they failed at it. And I'm laughing because now I see all these different documentaries and videos coming out, and they're just creating the same video over and over again with different cast of characters because other people have graduated from college. So now they've created the 3rd or 4th iteration of the same video talking about the cancer of campus anti-Semitism. And the answer is give us more money to fight that problem, even though the way that they've approached this problem for now 20 years sucks. So it's also funny because they're the ones who are controlling where the strategy is going, and they were not good at it.
I agree with you. There's an amazing lack of accountability within our own community as to what has unfolded and what has, for some reason, shocked people. Right? So I don't understand why people are shocked at what we call explosion of anti-Semitism post 10/7. There was a string of 10 straight anti-Semitic days in New York in December of 2019. Days, including the shooting at a grocery store, a Jewish grocery store in New Jersey, what they called random punchings of Jews in Brooklyn. These were deadly incidents, 10 straight days of attacks on Jews in New York. And not a peep, not a march. Jews have always comprised about 50% of the religious-based hate crimes and are less than 2% of the population. We haven't raised our voice. We haven't insisted on accountability. It just so happens that a number of months after that, 10 straight days, the BLM riots broke out, and all the Jews were in the streets breaking COVID protocol to go march for other people. And there's no sense of accountability that we have now, of saying, hey, this has been a problem for a very long time, and no one solved it. Why are all the same?
I'll call out APEC, for example. I remember when I was on campus and I was trying to push back against some of the campus anti-Semites, the Muslim Student Association, Students for Justice in Palestine, which, by the way, I wrote about a 5,000 to 6,000 word essay about SJP, and now it's being used to fundraise to fight SJP now by other groups that dismissed it as being extreme. But AIPAC's line was always, you have friends and potential friends. And I remember saying, no, you also have people that are just straight up anti-Semites that we need to expose and push back. And they were always trying to create this kind of centrist middle, while at the same time you had these students getting educated to just hate Jewish people, to hate Israel, and this woke extremism. And the center Jewish groups were actually trying to label right-wing people on campus as out of touch and not serious enough, because you have to see that everyone can be your friend. And it's that kind of thinking that helped contribute to the situation.
Oh, it's horrific. It's far worse than we even give it credit for. There were very shortly after 10/7, I went to NYU to talk to some of the students. At the time, I wasn't what you've called an influencer, which I hate the term. At the time, I had a relatively small following, but I had done the thing in Washington Square Park where Mahmoud Khalil, now we know it was Mahmoud Khalil, came to scream and shout and was incredibly racist.
The hero, Mahmoud Khalil.
The hero. And so they kind of invited me to speak, and I gave a talk about what I called the cancer of complacency in the community. So there's a cancer of complacency in the community that we don't realize that a worldwide pogrom is taking place. And we have leaders who are far more interested in maintaining their positions in a political sense than solving a problem. And it's the exact thing that anti-Semites hate Jews for. They hate Jews because Jews they perceive are chameleons. They can dress up in order to try to avoid scrutiny. But that's why we're hated. And so all the time, Jews are trying to triangulate not being too Jewish, not fighting for our own causes. So I recall at MIT back in 2012-13, we had distinct evidence. We had proof that the MIT religious Jewish community had been winnowed down to less than 1 million in terms of both men and women, right? Combined, men and women didn't reach 10. And there had been an intentional effort in the admissions office by someone who was involved in the admissions to intentionally exclude Jewish day school students from consideration, right? We had known that there was anti-Semitism in the admissions process. Undisputable. And so I went to the person who was involved in admissions, who sat on the Hillel board. The dean of admissions sat on the Hillel board. And he gave a very impassioned speech one night as to why MIT was signing on with Harvard in defending the lawsuit against unfair admissions practices. And his whole speech on a Friday night dinner to Hillel was why diversity was so important to the university. And I said, hey, Stu, his name is Stuart Schmill. I said, Stu, I don't get it. There's not even 1 million of Jews here. Right? Like, we can't even get 1 million. And because of that, further Jewish involvement at this university is going to be depressed. Right? And I know someone from Oakland, California, who applied last year, and he speaks like 4 or 5 languages, got nearly perfect SAT scores, and he was denied. right? So if you're going to bat for diversity of viewpoints on this campus, religious Jews are a minority of a minority, right? Let's bump them up to a minion at least. Let's get them up to a minion. And his response was not only that Jews are privileged, but how would it look if a Jew advocated for Jews? I was blown away, because no other community thinks like this. No other community goes, how would it look if we advocated for ourselves? It's such a poison, it's such a cancer within the community, and I think it informs the giving. I really think it informs the giving of when it comes to our own call.
You have to spread the money around, because if you're seen as
right, you don't want to be
too
the
Jewish,
Jew,
then you're biased, I guess.
Right.
Something like that.
Right, you don't want to be the Jew, but I would challenge people. Like Al Sharpton and Jesse Jackson have not made their names in Democratic politics by fighting for any other group besides African Americans. And all the credit to them. That's their job. That's their interest, right? They're an interest group. They get paid incredibly well, right? So, it's a grift, right? On their part, to be honest, it's a grift. Jews go to bat for everyone besides ourselves, and it happens in giving as well. And I really think that there needs to be a reckoning in two senses when it comes to not just giving, but organizations. Jews have failed and continue to fail in centralizing resources to Jews. So when I visited MIT last May, I was in a room full of students who were arguing with the adults in the room, the people who are the heads of Hillel and other organizations, on how to respond to the illegal encampment that had set up right outside of Hillel in the middle of MIT's campus. It was an illegal encampment. It had been going on for weeks. They had wanted to put on an Israeli Day ceremony or celebration. They had reserved months in advance, but now couldn't because it was occupied by an illegal encampment. And these kids, 9 months into November, December, January, February, March, April, May, 7-8 months into post 10-7, still had no voice, still had no command structure, still had no game plan for dealing with on-campus illegal encampments. Everyone in the room had a different perspective. All the adults in the room don't make waves, don't create problems. The young kids obviously wanted to fight. How is it that SJP or anti-Semites are all funded by the Soroses? They all get their marching orders. They all are incredibly well marshaled together and well organized. And Jews still to this day don't have a response. We don't have a command structure. There's no accountability for that, and it's a huge problem.
Well, I will just say that you're not going to have a command structure because we actually value a diversity of viewpoints, and there are real world agendas aside from just the destruction of a sovereign state.
I'll push back.
Right? So
I'll push back a little
bit. Like, for example, you can go on Al Jazeera. If you go on Al Jazeera and you're living in Gaza, you know what you're saying. You're saying there's a genocide, there's no food, they're shooting babies, they're doing whatever they're saying, but it's very, very structured because they know what they have to say. Where in Jewish people, when it comes to talking about Israel, you have a million different things that are going on because you're actually focused on building an economy. You're focused on actually making your society better. You're focused on a million things. But you don't, when they go on, they just say genocide, 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 genocide.
I'll push back a bit here.
Of course.
It's the organizational aspect that's incredibly lacking. So when it comes to, I sort of infiltrated one of the encampments at one of the universities. And I was asking, hey, what's going on in the next few days? And the person responded to me, oh, well, they told us that they don't have enough umbrellas for us all tomorrow. It's supposed to rain, so we just come back on, another day. I was like, who's they? And we're not allowed to know who's in charge, but there's a command structure, right? So in terms of the organization, in terms of learning how to protest or protest tactics, the anti-Zios on campus are incredibly educated, and it comes from sourcing, right? They don't just go online and learn how to protest or take over buildings. they're educated in classrooms, right? They have classes on it. When it comes to Israel advocacy, there used to be a program that you might remember called the David Project. When we were in school at
Yeah, of
Maimonides,
course,
like
and
we
of
took a
course
class.
they labeled Chuck Jacobs as an extremist.
Right. Amazing man. Amazing man. The father of a classmate of mine, Sarah uh, Jessica Casmer Jacobs, I think it was. Jessica Casmer Jacobs. Um, and um, and David Project, to my best of my knowledge, is no more. But two things are occurring. One is kids in our community have no idea how to debate Israel. They just don't know how to debate. They don't know how to hold their own in an Israeli debate because for years what they were fed doesn't work. Drip irrigation and Israeli innovation and startup nation is not a response to, hey, you massacred my grandfather and stole his land. It's not true. It's a lie. But how are you going to respond to that lie? Are you going to respond with, well, but Israel's the only democracy in the Middle East. Who gives a shit? Sorry.
Listen, I agree with you, but it also says if we're going to get into that there's also a big issue when it comes to how Israel's taught from a historical perspective in Jewish day schools as well, which it's not so straightforward. You can't. There are certain topics you would never talk about these things with regular middle schoolers anyway. So you're not going to sit there and talk about the specific moral justifications for behavior in World War II from every single perspective of every involved country to a group of 14-year-olds. So there are things that you have to be
Totally
mature
correct.
to handle.
No, but I think there's a Jewish psyche, which is because we are right, right? Other people will understand we're right.
I completely agree. This is a big problem.
It's huge, right? Like we're righteous, we're right, so people will see that, and that's just not how the world works, right? Because people, their lives don't revolve around us. They don't know the intimate details. People just want to put food on the table for their family and go to work and come home and have a future, right? They don't know anything about Israel. So I agree with you that there's a certain maturity that needs to be obtained in order to understand atrocities or historical events. But that's just not the world we live in. Right? The world we live in is that people are being bombarded from a very early age to hate Israel. They're being indoctrinated to hate Israel. It's what they see on social media and everything else. Jewish people need to understand, or we should internalize as a community, that there's a way not just to talk about the historical context of Israel, but to defend yourself as a Jew, to defend yourself as a Zionist. Right? If I go to a kid and I ask them what Zionism is, very few Jewish kids will tell me, well, it's a historically it's a historically key component and tenet of the Jewish religion, which states that Jews 3 times a day, not only do we pray to return to our historic homeland, but that Jews are incomplete without the state of Israel, or the land of Israel, and the land of Israel is incomplete without Jews. In that sense, Zionism is not something that was invented by Herzl in the late 19th century, right? It's something that's thousands of years old, but we never teach it that way.
You're talking about something that's I think that's separate from the You think that's actually core to the definition of Zionism? I would say Zionism is a political movement.
No, that's political Zionism. That's political Zionism.
So there's different kinds
Zionism,
of Zionism, but having a Jewish connection to the land of Israel is above Zionism, in the sense that Zionism is a you're defining Zionism as Judaism.
Judaism and Zionism are inseparable. It's kind of like Shabbos. Shabbos and Judaism are inseparable, as is Zionism and Judaism. It's a mitzvah, right? It's part of the mitzvot. It's what makes. Oh, sorry. Am I still there?
Now you're back. Yeah. Okay.
Right.
We can go down this rabbit. Wait a sec. We can go down this rabbit hole. Maybe we can. Maybe we want to. But that's a separate conversation, in the sense that you're talking about teaching an inherent Jewish connection to the land of Israel. If you want to label that Zionism, fine. But that's not what the modern discussion is about. But I agree. We can agree that a core problem is teaching Jewish children about the inherent Jewish connection to the land of Israel. If you want to label that Zionism, wonderful.
Daniel, that seeds the premise, right, is the issue. I mean, right? So I don't accept the premise that Zionism is a modern invention. And when you say and when you accept the premise that Zionism is a modern invention from a debate standpoint, then you're on the defensive of explaining why. Then everything starts in 1900, right? And so what my point here is that we are not well armed to speak or defend ourselves, because even seeding the premise is problematic. If we don't see that separating Zionism from Judaism is a debating tactic, is a tactic to discredit the state itself, or remove Judaism from Zionism, that is itself the problem in the debate, right? When you make it about an inseparable component of Judaism, it transforms the debate into one that you can actually have, right? I find it very hard to defend. If Zionism was truly a modern invention, then it's very hard to actually defend, right? Because how can you defend something that just started in 1900, right? When in fact the actual core issue
Well, wait a sec. Wait
is
a
that
sec.
it.
I don't agree with you because, for example, Americanism is also a modern invention. In the last 500 years, you have this concept of a of North America being settled, and then you're creating America. You're creating Canada. Mexico is created. That doesn't mean that it's by default wrong. You can have different concepts, but I will push back. It's a double-edged sword, because part of the issue is that if you say that Zionism or the state of Israel is so intertwined with Judaism that you can't even have a criticism, it creates in some corners
It's
of the
some,
pro-Israel world
but a
a
criticism
defense.
of what?
Yeah.
Like a criticism of what? I would ask, like, what sort
Okay.
of criticism?
So, for example, as someone who I'm deeply critical of the state of Israel from a perspective of someone who cares deeply about Jewish people and people who live in the state of Israel, but that doesn't mean that, like, you have to be able to have a discussion about an elected government in the year 2025 that is if that you can speak openly and transparently about it. Now, again, you could say, why aren't we also discussing a million other countries? Fine. That's also an issue. The non-Jewish obsession with Israel is deeply concerning and largely anti-Semitic. What I'm saying to you as someone within the Jewish community, sometimes people block discussions about very critical issues because the level of which it's intertwined. It's almost like you're offending someone's Jewish identity by having a discussion or being critical of what's going on, which is a double-edged sword when it comes to
That's their
the discussion.
that's their
This is not
that's their
debating
own
with
internal.
anti-Semites.
No, I
Yes.
totally get, but that's their own internal issue. That's their own internal insecurities, because the administration of the state of Israel has nothing to do with Zionism, right? The administration of the state of Israel is a political issue, right? Zionism is not. I seek to entirely separate Zionism from the political issue of political Zionism, right? It's merely the notion that Jews are inseparable from the land of Israel. How that's administered, in what form that is, governance-wise, who makes up the government, is
So I
completely
think we
different.
actually have a semantic difference. That's not. We don't even have a disagreement, because you're basically saying that for you, Zionism is what I would consider to be a fundamental Jewish value and a based on Torah that the Jewish people belong in the land of Israel, and that the land of Israel belongs to the Jewish people, and that's something that is divinely mandated.
Right. So I agree with you, but it's the fact that we call that a semantic argument that's the problem in the first place, because most people don't separate that out. Right. The separation needs to be made. And it's not by the Torah, because that's a call to authority. In a debate, you never want to call to authority. Authority is like, it's basically why people dismissed Douglas Murray on Joe Rogan's, even though there's a massive flaw with saying no one cites to authority. Where do you get your own sources that you consider to be an authority? But I don't cite to the Torah. I cite it based on the fact that it's just inseparable from the history of the people of Israel, the people of Judea, that Judea is their home. But but yeah, I don't use it as a means of
But
blocking political.
wait a second.
But if you're going to attack them,
Wait. Just because someone, wait. You have to. If it's not biblically mandated, then it would be bizarre for someone to say, well, I've lived there, and yes, there's been thousands of years of different occurrences, but like we insist on being here right now.
So
That
I
would be
can't.
weird because it wouldn't even
No,
be strategically wise.
it's strategically unwise to make the argument, because if you don't believe in the Torah or the validity of the Torah, or you believe that a human being wrote the Torah and it's not divinely written, then you're going to discount the argument entirely. The argument for me is based on archaeologically, we were there. It's a core value of the people who hold it. We might hold it because of the Torah. We might hold it because of the Torah. But the argument to be made in terms of Zionism on an externally facing focus, on the legitimacy of the fact that we belong in the land, is that it is a value of the Jewish people as they are made up to return to
Yeah,
the
but I don't
home.
care just because someone declares it to be a core value. So, for example, people who follow the religion of the Black Lives Matter movement and are basically saying, which has basically become a religion, and they are saying that it's their core value that they need to fight for not only equality but for reparations and for all things of those sort. I don't care that that's their core value. So why should they care what the core value is that we've determined to be a Jewish core value if it's if it's separated from the Torah? And when I say strategically unwise, I'm saying, why would the Jewish people want to live in this strip of land in 2025?
I'll answer. Because part of what makes a people by all standards anthropologically is a central cultural code. Right? It's part of the cultural code of Jews that Jews live in Judea. Right? That's a common language is part of the cultural code, a common ancestry, a common home, and a common morality also gets included in a common culture. Right? Part of the culture of Jews is that Judea is the home of Jews. Right? And you don't need to cite to the Bible. You can just cite the fact that there's archaeological evidence that Jews live there, and that culturally, in our text, in our liturgy, we hold this value to be an important value. So if all African Americans believed culturally that reparations were a thing, then yeah, I'd say that's inseparable from the Black identity. It just so happens that it's not. There's an incredibly fractious debate within the Black community, and it's a pretty modern invention in terms of reparations, who gets what. But culturally, it's unimpeachable that culturally, through thousands of years, Jews have handed down this Masorah, this identity that Jews belong in Judea.
I'm considering what you're saying. The issue, if you mentioned Douglas Murray, right? The issue that I thought Douglas Murray got obliterated on Joe Rogan, because
he didn't come off well.
He came off horribly, and I agree with him on 99% of the issues. But first of all, the whole they're making fun of him with the "Have you been there?" thing, but
have you been there?
Yeah, but do you understand that there are tens of thousands of quote unquote journalists who are in Gaza right now reporting some of the most vile lies possible beyond the imagination? And they are there. They are there in Gaza. So the whole "have you been there" thing is actually not even a real argument, because obviously you want to be well informed. And what he should have said was that you need to make a legitimate attempt at gathering information in the most authentic way possible through reputable sources. But just having physically been there is not really an argument. And then saying to go on Joe Rogan, which is an anti-credentialism program, and whine for an hour about credentials is not the smartest debate tactic.
Totally agree with you. I view it from a more problematic perspective in something that we've actually touched on, which is the belief that because we are right, and people will see that. Because of that thought process, right? Douglas Murray is assured, he knows from his own experience, he is correct, right? And therefore, other people are just factually incorrect. Part of that is that part of the reason that dude's incorrect is because he hasn't seen it. And that's, in Douglas Murray's worldview, highly relevant. Jews generally don't know how to debate, right? So I've debated Now thousands of people individually on Israel, because that's what I do. Every time the bobsled team made a stop, I did one of the tables, I pulled up for 6, 7, 8 hours, and I debated people. What moves the needle in debate is actual debating tactic. You have to hold a consistent line to get people to identify, to impeach themselves, right? And so why Douglas came off so problematically is why so many Jews don't know how to debate Israel, is he followed the misdirection, right? And it's like a dog seeing a shiny object and being blown off course. To have a person impeach themselves is most critical in a debate. So what he should have done is stuck to, he asked 2 questions, one of which, so he said, what would you do about the hostages? And what would you do with Hamas? And the hostage question is actually an appeal to someone's sensibilities, right? And on that, it's very easy to combat that. You could just say, like, hey, I wouldn't kill 50,000 to save 250. By the way, I'm of the same mind, right? Not when it comes to Palestinians, because they took it upon themselves, but I'm highly critical of mortgaging the future of the state of Israel to get back 5 people, right? Like handing over thousands and thousands of people who will commit another atrocity. I'm highly critical of that, right? That the same logic can be expanded if you view the Palestinians as innocent people. It's the same value. So I would never go down that rabbit hole. What I would have stuck to is, how would you deal with Hamas, which has a gun to your family's head, which has promised to rape your sister next week? How do you deal with those characters, right? They're in a house next door. They got a bazooka pointed at your family. What are you going to do about it? They're surrounded by their family, and they got a bazooka pointed at your family. And he didn't stay on that topic, because in his worldview, everything is kosher. Everything is right. He's right. Right. And so Jews fall into this trap.
Right.
Jews don't know how to
There's also the point where people feel that if you're criticizing Israel, you kind of open the door for people that just hate Israel. So you can have a legitimate discussion about issues you have in policy with the Israeli government or the IDF, and people kind of shy away from that because they don't want to open that door. For example, I think that on October 8th, if Israel had said, either we are going to make concessions and releases to get hostages back, and that's going to be the policy, and therefore you're going to conduct things knowing that you're going to do that, I think that's a very different place than kind of begrudgingly going bits and drips and drabs to get certain people back. And I think it was strategically unwise to have an inconsistent strategy of that sort. But oftentimes when people are having discussions, first of all, a lot of times it's like the Piers Morgan screaming back and forth type thing. And there's not really room for true discussions. And part of it is that people don't want to open that door, which is a problem that goes back to what you're saying about the lack of general education and being able to hold multiple ideas at once.
Yeah, I think Israel strategically has prosecuted every war since the 70s in ways that we wish would have been better. Right? I think that this war has been prosecuted in a particularly terrible manner, which is, if you fight a war is by, and I think this is part of the issue in debating Israel, is people don't really understand this, or at least how to frame it. War is a human tragedy above all human tragedies, because it affects the whole in a way that individual crimes don't. Right? It is individual crimes perpetrated at scale every day, all the time, unjustly. That is war. War is bad. War only becomes just when you have a just reason to prosecute it and a just objective for it. And so you cheap it. Two things have happened in this war. One is, as it always happens with the Palestinians, the notion of war becomes cheapened when you remove the responsibility of those who started it. Right? War itself no longer becomes the tragedy. The response to the war you started becomes a tragedy. That's number one. Number two is, Israel never holds to its strategic objectives when it comes to war. The only reason to send soldiers, children of Israel, door to door, sacrificing their lives when you could have just carpet bombed the place. If you really wanted to, you have complete air superiority, you could have just bombed the crap out of it. Right? The only reason to put soldiers in harm's way is because we said we wanted to return the hostages, and then we were also going to liberate Gaza from Hamas completely and fully, and that was the goal. The only reason the war has gone on as long as it has is those two goals. Those two goals are just goals. If you stop then any short of those two goals, you make a mockery of the sacrifices that took place every day until that point, right? You don't fight a war to a stalemate. That cheapens war, and it cheapens the sacrifice of everyone who came before it. And Israel has a very poor track record of doing this. They go in, they have a just reason to prosecute a war, they stop midway through. It's the Israeli condition, because we're never allowed to win. We're only allowed to fight to a draw. Douglas says this all the time, but he doesn't say it in the right way, right? It cheapens war itself. This government.
The other thing I want to mention about Douglas Murray and the failure in that debate was that he goes to the credentialism, right? And then the people that Dave Smith brings in, many of them actually have very strong credentials. So within the credentialism game, you also have to mention agendas and personal vendettas and the political system in Israel. So when Dave Smith mentions Ehud Barak, you're talking about someone who was on Epstein Island, allegedly, or on the plane, and has been a opponent of Benjamin Netanyahu for 2 decades, who hates him, who wants to destroy his legacy. And there's nuance even within the credentialism. So Douglas Murray didn't push back sufficiently on that.
Yeah, so I think that the problem, what Douglas is sorely was sorely unprepared for, is when you walk into an anti-credentialism setting. Anti-credentialism is about the suppression of ideas through people in the mainstream. That's anti-credentialism. It's like trust the science trademark on COVID vaccines sort of thing, right? It really strengthened since COVID, where all the doctors got it wrong, right? COVID was originally through, it was, the 6 feet thing was completely made up. All sorts of stuff was completely made up in COVID. And so credentialism really took a nosedive. What Douglas and most people, if people are watching this, if you're ever entering a debate, citing to authority is very poor, because if you don't recognize the authority, then your argument's out the window, right? So it's kind of like my dad knows best, right? When we're kids, we all think our dad is brilliant, right? So like our dad said this.
Hey, your dad
okay,
is
great.
Brilliant, by the way.
Well, my dad is brilliant. But as kids, we think our dad is like Mina Shemayim, he's God, right? What dad says is MS of MS, right? So how many times I remember as a kid saying, well, my dad said this, right? Other kids don't recognize the authority of your dad. They don't give a hoot. What we need to be prepared for when we enter these debates is, well, okay, so did you just pull your facts out of thin air, or did you pull them out of people that you think are authoritative, right? And is that not an authority, right? By what basis do they make their judgments? Just watching on television, right? Because generally, and Douglas was skirting around the edges here because he was talking about the debate on Winston Churchill. When these idiots cite the fact that Winston Churchill is somehow the aggressor in all the World War II stuff, they're citing neo-historians, people who hold themselves up with some sort of authority. They know a lot because they've read a lot or because they've been exposed to a lot. So it touches on exactly what you're saying, which is Ehud Barak himself is citing to authority. He was the prime minister of Israel. He's supposedly in the know. So we just need to be prepared, and that's why I never cite to the Torah. Is the issue of citing to authority is when an authority is not recognized, the argument's moot. You need to cite to facts. And so Douglas is sorely unprepared.
By the way, I do think that fundamentally it's okay to say that we're not going to be able to square the circle because we do not accept the same authority. If someone is going to question the validity of Torah, I'm okay with that being the premise. Because with removing Zionism from the Torah being absolute truth and being fundamental, to me is a little bit crazy. So I'm okay saying that we're not going to get to the same place with that as a fundamental premise.
So, but then two things. Totally get it. But then two things need to happen. Again, if people are watching and learning something about debating, two things need to happen. If you're solely debating someone else with no audience present, and you're trying, then there's a reason you're debating them, right? You're trying to either get
getting a coffee,
yeah, well, or going on a date with someone who's politically liberal, maybe. but if no one else is present, if the purpose of the debate is truly to try to change their mind, because if it's only one person, you're not trying to change their mind, then you're just having a mental masturbation session. Essentially, there's nothing to accomplish. But if you're trying to get them to change their mind, then you have to undercut their own reasonings, right? So citing to your own authority is not relevant there. You have to impeach their own reasonings. So if someone's like, okay, so it's terrible that children are dying, then you can actually say, yes, it is terrible that children are dying, right? It's absolutely awful that children are dying. How do we stop that? Right? Who's responsible for that? Right? That's appropriate in a single person. When it comes to a debate like the Oxford debates that we see, like people around, or the debates that I hold, right? The debates that I hold are not to change the minds of the people who come to argue with me. They're to create doubt and the reason for people to go research in those who are watching. So you have to address their points nearly exclusively. You have to dismantle their points. So many people stopped by the table after 10/7. It was just after 10/7. So Israel hadn't started bombing. Israel, like, a lot of stuff is happening, and people are like, well, they've started to shut off some electricity. And I was like, okay, let's talk about that. Like, what would you do? Right? Like it's if it's truly terrible to shut off the electricity, like what would you do in this case? Like you have to beat them on their own home turf, rather than what most Jews would say, which is, well, yeah, it's totally legit, right? Like we should do that. You have to get them to create their own inconsistency, because if they were to go and say, well, like they're aware people are around, right? It's kind of the same. Yesterday, one of the people who had messaged, this is like with regard to Miss Rachel for little babies or whatever, she was on Mediasan. And so someone said, you can't criticize Miss Rachel, right? She's a total Hamas apologist, but you can't criticize Miss Rachel because I'm a humanitarian. They use the words, I'm a humanitarian. I see the good in everyone. She just feels bad for everyone. I said, okay, so you see the good in everyone? Do you see the good in Hamas? Right? And so she would deflect. She's like, oh, well, I
This
think
is a
it's
political
terrible.
entity also.
Yeah, but I said, do you see the good? If you say you see the good in everyone, you have to pick apart their reasoning. So if you see the good in everyone, right? Do you see the good in the people who hopped on motorcycles, stormed into Israel, and raped minors at a music festival? Right? Do you see the good in them? Right? And so you have to create this internal inconsistency, because they can't admit to the crowd, yes, right? Because that's actually apologizing for evil. They know they can't apologize. They know they can't say that. So that's the only way. Rather than you saying, well, Hamas is evil and Hamas is this and Hamas is bad, you have to beat them on their own terms, right? You can't accept the premise, like in the same way that I said you can't accept Zionism as a separation point, right? You have to define the terms of the debate, but you have to beat them oftentimes by beating their own internal inconsistencies.
I hear, and also, I mean, what happened yesterday with Mohammed Sinwar is a perfect example, a real life example of the struggle that Israel has to deal with on a hourly basis. Israel knew that Sinwar was with hostages. They knew that that's where he was hiding. They knew he was hiding at times under civilian infrastructure like a hospital. And when they got information that he was no longer with the hostages for whatever reason, they struck, and Israel killed a certain number of innocent civilians that were near him, or impacted people getting medical care in a hospital. But you have to make a moral decision that, are you doing what's absolutely necessary for the return of the hostages, securing the borders of your country, and making sure that your soldiers are as safe as possible? Israel made that determination, and you can make a real argument that it's completely morally justified. And that's not, and Israel's not going around celebrating that an innocent person who was in the hospital wing got killed. That's of course we're not doing that. That's the difference between Israel and the death cults on the other side, which were parading Shani Luke's body across town. But for Dave Smith and others, they're just taking this completely amoral approach where they're saying if one person dies, then it means that you just don't care about human life. But you have a real life example of what happened yesterday, and of course they're silent because they don't want to talk about the specifics. They like to talk very, very bird's eye view without getting into too many of these things, because they know that it would force them to, like you said, on their turf, have to acknowledge some of these very deep and reasonable questions.
Yeah, I think there's a somewhat interesting point that this sort of touches on, which is policy versus the result of actions, right? Taking it in a more just form. So, for example, right, a lot of the post 10-7 table discussion, because Israel hadn't really responded very much, was a lot of people would come up and they would say, like, well, in prior years, Israel has killed X amount of people in these operations, right? Or Israel or Israelis, settlers have had violence, right? There's been settler violence, which is, by the way, infinitesimally small as a percentage of all like crimes. It's just magnified. But they'll go into like things of like settler violence. I'll say there's a distinct difference because people try to both sides it. It's very hard to defend after 10-7, especially when people the footage of 10-7 was fresh in people's minds. It wasn't like today where you could be like, that didn't happen. A lot of people were faced with the reality that did happen. They tried to both sides it. Making the distinction between a policy of murdering people, a policy of raping people, government-sanctioned horrors, and individual bad actors is incredibly important when it comes to the Israeli debate that people don't really talk about, or we're not well armed to talk about. If I'm going to use the term settler, even though it's a pejorative, right? If a settler goes and burns down someone's olive tree, hacks down someone's olive tree, a lot of times they're going to receive justice. They're going to be tried, right? They're going to, like, it's against the law. They're going to be tried oftentimes in a way that's overburdensome, right? That's incommensurate with the crime, right? Israel is highly prosecutorial in these cases to a point where they really shouldn't be, but that's not because it's not government policy. Government policy is not to do that, but government policy for the Palestinians is to do that, and far worse. If you kill someone, if you kill a Jew, you get a lifelong pension, which means it's government policy to kill Jews, right? There's and this is another debating sort of issue that most Jews kind of fail to touch on, and again, it goes back to how we're taught as kids, or how we're taught about Israel, which is, and Jews have never really wanted to allow the kids, I think, to internalize this. There's a difference of cultures, right? And in the Palestinian culture at the moment, right, it can be de-radicalized, but at the moment in the Palestinian culture, it is violently anti-Jewish, violently anti-Jewish, in a way that is culturally rotten. It's a moral stain on their culture that they have this as policy, right? While our culture really values the people in the South who were all attacked, or sorry, not the people in the South, the people next to Gaza who were all attacked, were attacked as the result of their goodwill towards the Palestinians. Palestinians came in, they received jobs, they mapped out the communities and butchered them for it, right? That is a difference in culture that we are not willing to fully talk to kids about and say, hey, that culture has a problem right now. It's incompatible with ours.
Well,
and it
also,
actually
but that's also the intersection of general education now, which leads into a bigger issue because you're essentially teaching this cultural relativism across every subject in higher ed, and then at the same time, like, it makes sense that people can't do that because that's what they're being educated, unfortunately, in so many
but we should change that in school.
100% agree.
It should be totally, and it's part of the reason that if we take a look at Judaism from a pyramid perspective, the big part of the base is Jews who are relatively unaffiliated, reformist Jews, and we're losing massive amounts not only to intermarriage, but we're losing massive amounts due to the fact they have literally no connection to Israel. I think that part of the Jewish identity argument that I make, and it's intertwining with Zionism, is that when you have no common thread, when you lose the religious aspect of Judaism, then it becomes purely a cultural identity, which is very easy to disassociate from. Right? There's nothing modern there. Right? There's nothing there in the present tense to bind them to Judaism. Zionism is the common thread there. If it's not religious identity, if it's not following the rules and the laws, if it's just going to get your bar mitzvah at 13 in temple, there's nothing left. There's nothing left of Judaism in the modern day, right? And so it's actually critically important to reinforce that. But where anti-Zionist Jews come into play here, or even those who question Israel questioning Jews, is that we fail to teach that culturally our culture is morally superior at the moment, not inbred, but at the moment it's morally superior to the culture next door, which seeks nothing but destruction. And so they go out into the world and they fight for that culture because they actually believe that culture holds their same values. Like, it's like Queers for Palestine, because they can't actually internalize, they don't realize that culture actually wishes them harm. And so it's our own fault. It's really our own fault that we don't go to bat on this. There's always, like, I have members of my family. I'll say Alex. Alex is a left-leaning Jew. Alex is a Hollywood Jew. He doesn't think of it this way.
The one who's more famous.
The funny one.
Yeah.
Yeah. If I were to go to any of his friends who are all Jewish as well, and say, hey, like, you guys are fighting, you guys are drawing a line for people that actually would also throw you off the building, their best response to that generally would be like, well, because of the actions we've taken. No, it's not. It's not. It's so narcissistic to say that. It's narcissistic to say that your own actions are the cause of a moral rot in a society, right? That it would be like saying, but they would never say the same thing of someone who is dressed, scandalously dressed in the street, and say, you brought that rape upon yourself, right? But we don't teach it, right? Jews do not teach us to their children that on a moral level, we hold a good moral cultural value system. And they do not. They objectively don't. And I think it's actually going to get worse over time rather than better. If we don't correct course for that, it's going to get far worse.
I agree with you. I want to pick this up at a later date whenever your training allows, because it's been fascinating. It took a lot of different turns here, which is great. And keep it up. Keep training hard. And God willing, you're going to be representing Israel on the world stage with a brand new sled in 2026.
I wish we could get a brand new sled. Our sled is very old. Can't afford it. To set the stage for people, Israel has never. I had to buy my own flight to the Olympics in 2018. Right? Israel has never put anything into this program. We are the least funded team probably in bobsled history. Well, I mean, we have to be by definition. We got zero. We're the least funded team in bobsled history and one of the most successful at that.
It's a good return,
but we still
good return on investment.
Again, it's God, it's an excellent return. I always kind of the way I phrased it back in 22, and maybe it just didn't break through. I oftentimes started the conversation with, well, you know what? If you can help us find 50 grand, you can buy Israeli Olympic history and an Israeli Arab bobsled team at the Olympics. Like, for 50 grand, you can do that. All we needed at that time, like, I was deeply in financial distress, but I just needed a new sled. I really did. I was like, for 50 grand, you can create a generational story. I didn't even see it. And that, to me, was like, that was the biggest return on investment I could ever imagine in the Jewish philanthropy space. The biggest one. But it's sort of the same. Like, we're kind of in a very similar position. We do need to raise like 250 at the moment because I'm living in a shoebox. I can't afford to pay athletes to come. But it is an amazing return on investment. Sport generally is an amazing return on investment, and not to pump just sports, because I care about sports. Sports is an amazing return on investment because it's similar to education, right? It provides a means for which you can parlay that. It's compound interest in your own development. And because of that, not only do you become a better person, but it strengthens your identity of what you represent. And if you invest in Jews who are highly representative of Judaism in sport, then it strengthens their ability to represent the people and the country that they represent in a far better fashion. Because athletes almost by definition are very aware of the goals that they set and are very aware of the actions they take, right? Far more than most, I think just general human beings in life
Well,
who just have general
when your
obligations.
body mass index is extremely important, you're going to be careful with
Every
every
detail,
behavior, right?
every detail is highly calibrated. So it's not exclusive to sport. Like musicians are like this. A lot of people who are just crazy about, what they do are like this. But athletes have to be at that level of precision and detail or they fail, right? And it's extremely relevant in Olympic sport because we get one bite at the apple every 4 years. And if you fail at that, you got to wait another 4 years. Like if we had made 22, I wouldn't be competing, but I had to compete for the last 4 years and spend how much money? Um, Sport is an amazing return on investment. I'd say two things that are very akin, not in terms of value, right? The military is a value unparalleled, but in terms of continuing value that it provides to someone's life, the structure it provides, the ability to develop, sport is very similar to military service because you have to structure your goals in your life around a common goal point, right? And so there's also a reason why when people move out of the military and when they move out of Olympic sport, they suffer very similar rates of depression, right? They suffer a very similar lack of purpose in life because both lived in a system of self-structuring, which worked towards a common purpose and goal, a long-term purpose and goal, and both lose that. So actually, our foundation, which I'll devote a lot of my life to after I leave sport, it has also been in contact with people in the military because it shares a very similar, like athletes and military people share that very similar lifestyle. I will never draw a parallel between the value they provide. IDF
Right, but
is a
the
value unparalleled.
discipline, the need, yeah.
They're just exactly the same.
So AJ, I hope people watching this and others see what's going on and choose to contribute. And love to have you back to talk about all sorts of issues going forward. But best of luck with your training here.
Anytime, Daniel. Just as a personal thing, like I've known of you and known you for a very long time. Both Bostonians, and your reputation preceded you. I absolutely love the work that you do. I think it's really amazing. It's been a really good example for me as a human being. But
Thank
getting
you. Well,
soldiers.
you too. By the way, I wish I could go and do this. Anytime I see what you're up to, it's awesome. So
I
I'm a big
appreciate it.
fan, and we should. This is a long overdue discussion, and I really genuinely would like to get more into more of these things. I think it's interesting to have higher level discussions about some of these core issues, and hopefully people can learn a thing or two.
Yeah. All right. So I guess we can end the podcast. I did want to talk to you. Can I give you a